Manor Lords is technically outstanding and full of potential. One of the many positive reviews to also point out that there's much more to come for this strategy game that just recently concluded its demo where over 300,000 players took part, making it the most popular demo at the Steam Next Fest, which is quite impressive. While strategy games are more mainstream than they perhaps used to be, for it to take out the top spot is very cool. And perhaps for good reason. Manor Lords is something special, and in this video we're going to pick apart what's next for Manor Lords after its explosive demo. Where does Manor Lords go from here? Well, if you're unfamiliar, Manor Lords is a medieval strategy game. It features in-depth city building, large-scale tactical battles, and some economic resource management simulation as well. It was, by the way, also, did you know, crafted by but one solo developer. It kind of boasts these three things. The first is its organic city building. That's what we really got the hands-on experience with recently. It's gridless, it's organic, it's full of freedom, and it works really well. The second thing that it boasts is historical realism. Of course, we've seen this as well in the demo. Not just the oxen plowing the fields, but all of the different details carefully thought out throughout supply chains, resources, everything it's got to offer. And of course, this all plays out in a diplomatic, or more importantly, a militaristic system. Kind of like a total war style combat, and this is the one that we know the least about so far, but we'll have some footage to unpack very shortly. If you're unfamiliar with me, my name is JumboPixel. Thank you so much for joining me today. Now let's unpack Manor Lords and all that it has yet to offer us. And probably the most significant thing is going to be medieval warfare, Manor Lords' combat system. We've not really had an opportunity to even play with it yet. Yet we do have quite a bit of information about it. Not just the combat itself, the real-time tactical battles that will play out, but also the diplomacy system, the grid-like, the Lords system, right? This is literally Manor Lords. There is a king, there is tax, and underneath it lays all of this interesting technology. The motion capture for the units, of course, and then there's that photogrammetry and the simulation of the world, because of course, all of this is playing out inside of Manor Lords' living and breathing world as well. Here you get a feel for how the territories will play out, right? I'm the lord of this one, you're the lord of that one, maybe we're paying taxes or fighting with each other, but also more broadly, within that there will be these tactical battles. And of course, all of the things that Manor Lords delivers, like a climate and seasons. More on that in a bit. What you're watching now is the medieval warfare trailer for Manor Lords. And it will show you a few different things. One of the things that it focuses in particular on, and I think one of the reasons why people have likened it to Total War a lot, is due to the unit formations commanding the real-time tactical battles, right? You can see it here in the formation dragging in its waypoint system. Is it an entirely new system? Well, unlikely, but why fix it if it ain't broken? Although I don't think that's really fair for Manor Lords, because as we've already covered, Manor Lords just has something about it that is a bit special. Here you'll notice the real-time battles playing out. There's also other things that are being considered, not just in the type of unit that's being deployed. We know Manor Lords will have 3 different types, but also in how they're commanded around the battlefield. There are things being considered like the height advantage here, so the geography of the map. Also fatigue of units, kind of like a war support, a war weariness, but in general, just an energy level, right? Just general fatigue. Moreover, there are weather conditions, and of course, their equipment. As I say, from what we understand so far, there'll be 3 different types of units in terms of their professionalism. We know from this footage that there'll be, of course, both ranged and melee, but within that melee units, there'll be a very different level of military capability. You'll have your relatively unarmed peasantry, and then your more formed, more trained military units, and of course, finally, mercenaries that we'll be able to hire. At least that's what we know so far from that system. It was a relatively short look, but it does give us quite a bit of detail on what we should expect. And so if we know what to expect from the combat itself, how does it fit within the broader world? I've hinted at this a little bit already, but there seem to be a few roles around diplomacy, not just your internal politics, but also external diplomacy with other lords who live within the realm. It is, of course, their land that you could look to take, or yours that could look to be stolen from you. If we delve into the Steam page and a little bit more detail, we get a feel for how this could play out. And I'm going to read it to you verbatim because I think that's the best way it can be delivered. Yours is but a small parcel of land in a vast territory, and the competing ambitions between you and neighboring lords will inevitably lead to conflict. Lead your people into battle, not as expendable units to be easily replenished, but as your beloved loyal subjects, where every death is a cost worth considering. We know that from playing the demo. It's a relatively small city builder, right? You're not going to have a million population. And every single one of the people who lives there, of working age anyway, working age is a flexible thing in the medieval ages. Anyway, putting that aside, every single person that lives here is very valuable. You need them to work the land. You need them to pull the carts. They matter a lot in a relatively small world. And I think that's really stressed really well there. Thinking more broadly about the diplomatic system, though, we know that we'll train the skilled warriors to fight battles alongside us. They also share a little bit of extra detail here, though. At times, these soldiers will be needed to crush rebellions or suppress banditry. So we know, or at least we get a feeling, that it's not just other lords that we'll be fighting with, but also perhaps internal rebellions or more roaming banditry. Neutral tribes, if you will. And at other times, you'll lead your men into battle to conquer or defend territory, and when needed, mercenaries can come at an extra cost, as I mentioned earlier, sort of canvassing the different types of unit. More in the detail on the diplomacy system, which is described as robust, it will allegedly allow us to communicate with the other lords, using influence or threats to sway their actions. So there's a little bit of a diplomatic system here as well. We'll have ways to engage with those lords, maybe pushing our own demands or ceding some to them. It goes on to say that the lords, the competing lords, have their own goals and will seek us out as well. And our response to their offers or insults can mean the difference between war and peace. So it's a conflictual world, of course, that we live within. It's in this way, maybe, that the Manor Lords combat system will differ a little bit, and that the comparison to Total War is just slightly off, and how significantly it seems it will value those individual people. As I mentioned earlier, they really matter. They are literally the people growing the crops, and we don't have many of them to go around. Unlike in a game of Total War, when you might have hordes and hordes and hordes of units. It will place a really interesting balance on combat in Manor Lords, and it may make it especially weighted and significant, something that you might think twice about. That's just my speculation. We'll have to see how it plays out in future. Speaking of future, what are they working on now? What is this lone developer working on now? Because of course, don't forget, this was created by but one man. Well, we know a little bit anyway from the Twitter page, the Manor Lords Twitter page. It's finally time for me to let go of some of my duties. I'm on the lookout for specialists in all sorts of slightly technical things, including creature animation. Here's looking at that oxen. Importantly, though, here we see it's some freelance work, not full-time. Are we expecting a massive studio expansion? Probably not. But it's nice to see that the solo developer, now supported, of course, more recently by Hooded Horse as a publisher, is getting a little bit of extra help in what is a fantastic, from what we've seen so far, city-building medieval game. There are, outside of the combat system, a few things that we know are missing, or we could infer are missing, from this information on the Steam page, and from our experience inside of the demo as well, from actually getting hands-on with some of how this works. First and foremost, we know that there were some resources in the game that either weren't usable or weren't particularly valuable. Iron was somewhat limited. The only use for it, or the only real use for it, were tools used by people who had leveled up their homes to build gardens in the backyard. A somewhat lengthy sort of end game step for the demo, if you will. Again, very restricted in what it delivered, but delivered it very well. So we know that there'll be more to do around those resources. Stone, I think, was in the game and had almost no use case from memory. So definitely, of course, more things to develop there. That one's fairly straightforward. Thinking a little bit more deeper and into the detail, we also had a sort of a happiness quality of life system, if you will, where populations sort of desired a few different things to be met. They wanted a few different types of food or a few different types of luxury good, like clothes and sheets. Luxury good. For the ages, probably was. We know that that system allowed them to level up their homes, as I mentioned earlier, let them build gardens in the backyard or what have you. Here, you can see it on screen. We should expect, of course, that this will be developed further. Maybe there will only be 2 levels to the homes. Feels unlikely. I think we should expect a lot more. In the Steam description, it labels off a whole load of other things that you can really get a feel for how they might play out in a more detailed way. One of them might be the trading posts. Of course, in the demo, we didn't have anybody to trade with. There were no real other lords that we could interact with. There was no diplomatic or warfare system. What role will those trade posts and that trading function have in a more developed game where there are traders, potentially bandits rolling through? Well, you can probably infer a little bit and connect the dots, but we don't have any more information on it, so I can't report any more factual things other than to say I would expect those systems to develop even further still. Lastly, of course, we knew about things like the herds of deer, which actually lived. They migrated away from an encroaching civilization, and if you overfarmed them, they'd be completely gone. All of those resources, crop rotation at the farms, all of these things have a wonderful level of detail, and you can see how future ones would play out just the same. Seems like there's a lot of work ahead, and if you go to the Steam page, you'll be slapped with a big TBA when you try and figure out what is Manor Lords' release date. Short answer is, we don't yet know. Long answer is, if you think about the features I just listed, and acknowledging that this is a handcrafted creation developed largely still to this day by one person, it's easy to speculate that we might be waiting some time for a full release of Manor Lords. It could, however, of course, take the early access route. Again, this would be speculation by me. I have no insight or detail on it. But if we look at Hooded Horse, the publisher, their other strategy games, and more general trends in the gaming marketplace, it might not be unrealistic to maybe expect some kind of earlier access beta release ahead of its full release. However, with its still listed as a TBA, I wouldn't, sorry to burst your bubble, expect to see a full version of Manor Lords anytime soon. That being said, let's not forget, right at the front of the video I mentioned, this was the most popular game at the Steam Next Fest. It was the most popular demo. It also surged up from something like the most 17th or 18th wishlisted game on Steam to the 7th. That's across the board, by the way. Not just within our little strategy or city building simulation subgenre, but it's across the board. So we've definitely seen an incredible outcry of support behind Manor Lords. Overall, very popular reviews. And I think, at least in my own personal take from reading the comments and talking with many of you, a real admiration for the attention to detail that's gone into this game so far. Not just the workers, not just the farms, not scrolling in and living from their perspective, but those other broader things, this map that we don't yet know about, the seasonality to the game, the way that the crops come in and out, and then you think about how that might be applied to a Total War-esque combat system. And you can see that Manor Lords clearly has a bright, bright future ahead of itself. Is it overly ambitious? I wouldn't say overly, but it is incredibly ambitious. Absolutely. The scale of the game isn't obscene, though, at the same time. We're not running these towns, lordships full of hundreds of thousands of populations. Every pop matters. And I think that that will matter for the future development of Manor Lords. Thank you very much for joining me in this What's Next look at Manor Lords. I'll be sure to cover all of the news and updates around Manor Lords in future, and I'll see you next time. Take care, everybody, and bye-bye.